Okay, so there's been a bit of interest in seeing how Falcon works. So this is my first ever tutorial video. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through some basics of Falcon, particularly focusing on the way that multis, programs, layers, key groups, and oscillators are all laid out. And as we do that, I'm going to build a simple patch. And maybe you can edit along, and that'd be quite fun, actually make a patch at the end of it. So let's get going. When you open Falcon, this is what you initially see. We've got three main parts to this. We've got the left hand, which is where you get all the parts you've got open showing here. You've got a tree and you've got a list view. We're going to focus mostly on the tree view today. In the center here, I spend most of my time here in the edit window and or in the effects window. And sometimes if I'm running some event processes, I'm in here. But mostly I'm in here with the edit window. We'll spend most of our time today in here, probably all of it. Over on the right, you get, a library browser. You can open up places on your hard disk. You can, here we go, search. It's doing an index. Didn't expect it to do that. And this is where you can search where your patch is. The list of oscillators. So oscillators are things that make sound. You've got sample-based oscillators. You've got synthesis-based oscillators. We're going to probably use just an analog oscillator today. Keep it nice and simple. Let me know in the comments or on the forum what other oscillators you'd like some tutorials on. FX, obviously, this is where you get all your FX you can apply, reverbs, delays, EQs, compressors, you name it. It's got everything. They're all really good. Event processors, that's where your ARPs, your sequencers, all the other sort of MIDI processors live in here. So audio is FX, MIDI is events. It's the best way of thinking of it. So let's get into looking into it. So when you first open Falcon, you get nothing, obviously. It's empty. There's no program loaded. There's no multi. Multi is simply a series of programs. Each one of these yellow box here is going to be a program. You can create more of those parts here in the program. A part of the program is a synonym. You'll see a lot of that in Falcon where the same thing is called different things in different places. It can be a bit confusing. So now I've got two parts, each for the program. I'm going to remove that one. I don't need it. Here's my program. So each program can have 0 or more layers. Typically going to have at least one. It's not going to make any sound. Each layer can have 1 or more key groups. And key groups is where voices are. And key groups contain things that make sound, oscillators. You can have 1 or more of those. So if you think you can have, 10 oscillators, 10 key groups with 10 oscillators each, well, that's 100 oscillators. And then you can have 100 layers. You're up to, 10,000 oscillators. It's possible. It'll fall over. It won't work because it's single-threaded, single CPU. There's no way it'll cope. But you could. It's as flexible as that. So we're going to start with something really simple. We're going to create just a basic analog. I don't know, we'll just grab one of these presets. What you've got here is each of these sort of elements here with a little waveform is an oscillator. So I can drag in and just drop it here. Ooh, just drag in and drop it there, and it'll actually assign it across the whole keyboard there. So everywhere on this keyboard now has a sine wave. Pretty boring. Or these here are different presets of the analog. So if that was a bit boring, I can access them here and I can drag them in. And look, I'll show you how you get more than one oscillator per key group by going, let's bring in synth brass. I can either drag it here and drop it on the keys, or I can just drag it here where the plus sign is, because oscillators, add one here. Great thing with Falcon, there's usually at least 2 usually 3, if not 4 ways of doing everything. And you'll see that. I'll try and show you all the different ways I know. There's probably ways I don't know. So I'm going to drag this one here to the plus. I've got another analog. Ooh, I've got another analog. This one's got the preset synth brass. And if we look, it's got set itself up with some different settings to how the normal one is. You know, it's got 3 voices. It's got this set up to 30 semitones, bit of a detune and so on, right? I can get rid of them. I'm back to normal. I could add one here, right? There's a third way of adding an oscillator to a key group. Run there, drag and drop here, drag and drop down to there. I'm sure there's more. I bet there's more. They're the ones I know. I suppose you could also drag it to the tree. So the tree here, here's our part. So we had our part here. There's our part 1, program, layer 1, layer 1, key group 1, there's key group 1. And now I'm down to analog, there's the analog there. And I bet I could probably drag this and drop it here. And there you go. 4th way of doing it. I bet there's 5. I bet there's so many. I don't want that one. They're called nodes over here in the tree. Everything in the tree is a node. So what happened when I added this analog? So if I remove that again, and in fact, let me remove the key group and the layer. So we're just here with the program. It's got nothing. And when I dragged in my oscillator, it's picked up the synth brass preset. And it's created a key group and a layer. It's created the oscillator. It's also created an envelope and mapped it to key group 1 volume. So key group 1 volume here, or gain. We're back to that whole thing, the same thing called different things in different places. Confusing. So it's mapped to this here. And down here at the bottom, here's our modulation section, which is now showing. There's my amp envelope. And there's my envelope. So I've got 1 millisecond attack, 15 millisecond delay, sustain, release. If I go here, you know, I said there was more than one way of doing everything. You can change your attack, decay, sustain, release over here as well. I could double click here and type in a value. I could have 50 millisecond attack. I could have 300 millisecond release, you know. I can change it over here. I can move this up and down, change my release time. I can double click here. I can type in a value. I can hold down the Alt key, click, and it will reset back to the default. Again, so many ways of doing the same thing. To reset to default is never a double click, I'm afraid. It's always an Alt click. It's a bit different to most VSTs, if you haven't found that already. So let's choose something a bit cinematic-y, a bit paddy. Let's have it 300 millisecond release, 300 millisecond attack. Should sound a bit paddy now. There you go. No reverb, no delay yet. That's all just attack and release. It's a sine wave with some semitone sync and a bit of detune and 3 voices. So what that means is each of these voices is being G-tuned 8.56%. You know, if you go wild, 30%, you start to get more of a super saw type effect. This hard sync, because it's effectively syncing it to a oscillator you can't see or control, but that kind of sends it into a saw wave with that sort of shift on it. Something that's more subtle, as it was to start. Now it just sounds like a single voice, but rich and thick. And if we do that in real time, okay. By the way, you might have noticed I'm full screen here. That's because I'm running this in desktop mode. You can only really get this absolute full screen spread when you're launching it direct as a standalone app. Well worth doing when you're doing sound design. You need all the space you can get, unless you've got like a giant monitor. I'm working on a 1440p here. So there's the oscillator. We have a sound. pretty boring. What can we do to make this a little bit more interesting? Well, how do modulations work? We can add a modulation to anything we like anywhere. I'm going to take this key group panning and I'm going to add a modulation to it. Now, because I want this modulation to effectively act a little bit like an envelope, it wants to be triggered when I press a note. Only things that are at key group level can be triggered when you press a note on the keyboard or a piece of MIDI. If you place modulations at layer level or program level, they won't respond to MIDI. They'll just free run the whole time. So they're not aware of when you've got your note on and note off effects. Only at the key group level does it pick up on that. So I do want that. So I'm going to add this modulation down here. I'm going to just put a regular old LFO. And here's my new LFO down the bottom. You can see there's the original amp envelope that controls the attack and release of the volume, the gain, the amp. Here's my new LFO. And you can see it says key group to pan. My amp goes key group to volume, volume, key group to pan, pan. We can see that over here as well, key group to pan. Lots of ways of doing the same thing. There's all my LFO parameters. There's all my LFO parameters. I can do it there or do it here. Or I can right click on the pan and edit modulations. There's a third way. There's always a third way. Got the same controls. And again, it shows me key group to pan, but I've also got the other modulations in the same key group, even though I right clicked on pan. I can still see key group to volume, my amp envelope. Right, so be really careful what you're editing because it does let you go beyond what you thought you clicked on. So how do I want this to behave? Well, I want a bit of delay. You know, let's give it a good half second or so before the LFO kicks in and starts panning left to right. Here we go. It's panning left to right. It's a bit wild, especially if I've got headphones on. That's really hard panning. So how do I stop it hard panning quite so far? Well, this little dial here is the strength that modulation is applied. And I can reduce this down. So if I wanted to only pan half as wide, I can go to 0.5. I can do it by moving it. I can double click. Right, same as always. I can edit it, I believe in the, here. There's my ratio, 0.5. Lots of ways of doing the same thing. I'm going to go back down here now. So now it won't go quite so wide. It only goes half the width because I typed in go half as wide. I want to go a bit wider, 0.75. Now, there we go. It's coming in a bit abruptly. How do I make that come in a bit slower? Well, rise is like an attack. You know, it's how long it takes once it starts taking effect to ramp up to the full effect. So I'm going to make that half a second as well. So now we've got 657 millisecond delay, 500 millisecond rise. So you get a nice smooth entry of this panning. Okay, sounds pretty natural now. Can I make it even more interesting? Well, can I move the phase around? This is a sine wave. Now it's going to start up the top rather than here. So you heard how it started on the right and moved to the left rather than starting dead center. Okay. I can slow it down a bit. Speed of my LFO. Let's go once every 4 seconds. So 0.25 hertz is once every 4 seconds because a quarter of a cycle. So no, we still have no effects. It's just an oscillator with panning. That's all that is. So let's put some effects on. Where do we add effects? We can add effects at the key group level. And when you do that, the effects gets applied per voice. This is something I picked up when I watched Dan Worrell's good videos on Falcon, where if you apply, say, a distortion at the key group level, each individual voice, so if I press two notes, say C and E, that's two voices, a voice for C and a voice for E. If I put FX here, each one of those voices is going to get a separate instance of that FX. So if I put distortion on, they're each going to get their own distortion, which is really handy if you want to avoid sort of intermodulation for distortion. If you have, I'll show you the difference here. Let's put on something like fuzz, nice and strong. So per voice, there's no beating, they each sound separately. If I put that same wave shaper at the layer level, what it's going to do is it sums the output of the two voices. And now we're sort of, on a single channel containing all those voices together. And if I put the same distortion, fuzz, you're going to hear some beating, I think. That's wildly different, correct, right? So choose wisely though, because each voice is going to get its own instance. If I put a reverb here, for instance, I don't think I'm allowed to put a reverb. No, it's not going to let me. Too CPU intensive. But each thing you put here is going to happen per voice. So if I'm playing, for all 10 fingers, you're going to get 10 instances of that FX, 10 oscillators, 10 instances. Can add up. And when you're talking about Falcon, it's a single-threaded app. You want to conserve your CPU where you can. So I think by that, what you do want at the key group level, though, is things like filters, things that are going to react to note on and note off events. So effectively, they need envelopes. They're going to react to your playing. Filters are really good for that. So let's add a filter. Recently, they added this one. I like this VCF20. It's a recreation of the filter in the MS-20, the Korg MS-20 from 1978 when I was born. It starts off in low pass mode. You can change it to high pass, low pass. It starts off at a fairly reasonable cutoff. So if I play now, it won't sound nearly as bright. It's quite dark now. So how do we make this interesting? It's not doing anything right now. It's not reacting to me playing. It's not doing anything. Well, I can either connect it to the existing amp here, and there's loads of ways of doing this. I can drag from here. I can drop onto the there. Now what's going to happen is oops, I didn't mean to put that on there. Let me get rid of that. Put it on the cutoff. So now, when I play a note, the amp envelope is going to apply not only to the gain, but also the filter. So that go up and come down. Goes up. It comes down. It's not going very far. But that's a bit boring. You generally want your filter to go on a different envelope to your amp. So I'm going to clear that. I'm going to add at the key group level because I want it to react to MIDI. So it's got to be at the key group level. Don't put it at the layer or program if you want an envelope. It'll let you put it there, but it won't work. So a little gotcha. And I'm going to put, I don't know, just a digital. Let's change to a digital ADSL. So we've got attack, hold, delay, sustain, release. Delay at the start as well before the note even starts. So here, let's have a bit of a slower ramp up. Let's go for a half second like that. This time, let's hold on to it for another half second or so. And then let's drop down the filter like that. And let's have it fade out like that. Should sound quite nice. can see that each note I'm playing gets its own filter, its own envelope for both the amplitude and the filter for every note. And the visualization just shows the last note played's visualization of those modulations. Now let's go back to the oscillator for a second. Let's crank the voices up. I can click and hold and drag up and down. I'm going to make it 5 voices, go stereo. Let's widen it right out. Okay, a bit more stereo. So now we've got a oscillator, polyphonic. Polyphonic is up here. See, we're in polyphonic mode. You can choose portamento, mono, portamento. Oh yeah. All sorts of modes. We're in poly, and we've got a nice wide stereo sounding unison. Got 5 voices. For every time I hit a note, we're getting 5 sine waves being produced, spread across the stereo spectrum with a bit of detune. Right. Got a filter going, and that's quite nice. We can change the peak here. It's the resonance. Okay, key tracking, you know, same as all synths. As you go up and down the keyboard, if you set this to 0, the hertz here will stay static. So no matter what we do, it's always at 212.8 hertz for every note I play, which is G sharp 2 apparently. Okay, or I can set to 100% key tracking, where now it's going to follow the frequency of whatever note I play. Okay, usually you want somewhere in the middle. Bring this down. Now I don't like how wide open the filter gets at the peak. So I can go back to here, I can go right, edit modulations. That's wiping way too wide for my taste. And bring down the strength of this modulation. Maybe half as much. That's much nicer. And you've got all settings you can muck around with over here. Okay. So, oscillator, filter, basics of synthesis in place. Let's get some FX going. As I said earlier, if I put delays and reverbs down here, it would be very CPU intensive, 1 per voice. So it doesn't even let you put most of those things here. So we're going to put a little delay on. We're going to have a little... this is always very nice. Either this HP Land 8 or HP 8 dot. They're very nice delays. Beautiful, right? Really nice stereo effect. I'm going to put on a nice reverb, spark verb. These are all really cool. Abyss, it's a great mode. It's probably a bit much at 70%. Bring that down a bit. Now, I don't know if you heard that. Bit of detune going on. That's this modulation here on Spark Verb. You can choose how much it modulates the frequency of the reverb echo, the grains. This is probably a little bit much, 6.64 cents for me. I like it a bit lower. It's a bit too obvious at that level. I like to bring it down like this. And now you don't hear the detune so much. Okay, so we got a very standard, sort of almost like a saw wave with a filter on it. bit of delay, bit of reverb at this point. Pretty ordinary. So how can we make this a bit more interesting? So let's bring in a different type of synthesis. Let's have a look at a wavetable. So wavetable oscillator, a bit more complex than analog. With analog, you only get a handful of waveforms you can choose from. Square, triangle, sine, the classics you'd see on an analog synth, right? Hence analog. With a wavetable, masses of these wavetables. And these are my favorite, the analog ones. I'm just going to choose a brutal one. There we go. Now, wavetables, if you're not familiar, they're essentially a whole series of different oscillator waveforms, usually well related to each other, and you can cycle through them. So as you cycle through them here, you see how the waveform changes a lot. And you can hear this. Or not. There we go. Create some interesting noises, but how do we use this to effect? Well, we want to modulate that index. We want to move through this waveform, creating some movement in the sound. I'm going to add a modulation. I'm going to put it at the key group level, always at the key group level when I'm dealing with oscillators, always. Drunk's a fun one. It's kind of random. What this is going to do now, when we play, it's going to move around kind of randomly. Not doing a lot there. There we go. Now, there we go, it's moving around. I'll raise this up a little bit so we can hear it a bit more. Selecting drunk down here to edit it. I could do it here. I could right click here and do edit modulations. Choose drunk. I could do it here, right click, edit modulations. Go straight to drunk in this instance. Okay. So that's created a little bit of movement. Controlling the strength. Bias in this sense means strength, as far as I can tell. Just get it moving around a bit more. There we go. So there we go. Perfectly reasonable, basic sound. It's a sound. It's usable. We can do more. So we've got delay going on, we've got spark flow going on. Well, why don't we add something at the program level? Let's start to compress this together, get it sounding a bit, glued together. Let's put on a nice 3-band compressor. Here we go, is our 3 bands, 1, 2, 3. This is now at the program level. So if we had multiple layers, they'd all be summed up and processed now at the program level. With it, without it. We can go further. We can add in a maximizer. It's kind of like a limiter, but more. Doing idea. We could add in a little bit of distortion. As I found out recently, the Oxford inflator is just simply a wave shaper. So let's add a wave shaper. We've got some high frequency in here, so let's do a bit of oversampling. Let's choose something a bit more interesting than that. And give it a little bit. Okay, we have a sound. We'll reduce that a little bit, it's a bit bright. Maybe I'm going to reduce the strength of the envelope a little bit. Nice. Okay, so I've got a program I like. How can I make this into something I can come back to later and not have to remember what all these various things are doing? This is where I start to use macros. Now we've got this info tab here. It's blank. There's nothing on here, right? Nothing's showing on here yet. If I go back here and I say, well, that little control that I was playing with there about the brightness that the envelope effect has. Let's go to my cutoff filter and edit modulations. If I right click on that, assign to macro, and create a new macro. We have a new macro, macro 1. There it is. I'm going to call this cutoff. Back here on the info screen, cutoff has now appeared. All right, so any sort of thing that I can tweak here and play with, I can create a macro for it. I can name that macro something I want to call it. I can even apply that macro to more than one thing. So if you want to make it so it's a real macro and controlling multiple parameters at once, I can just drag this onto anything else I want it to do. Wave index, phase distortion, put all these things on, right? There's my macro. Maybe I want to be able to control the mix of the reverb. Let's create another macro. And look, I could assign it to the existing macro cutoff. There's always more than one way of doing everything. Add a new macro. Here it is, macro 2. Reverb mix. There it is, reverb mix. Could do the same thing with delay mix. It's always useful. Add a new macro. Delay mix. Delay mix now appears. Right, so now we've got all these useful controls. We can have no delay, no reverb. Just have reverb. I think I'm finding this a bit much. Just bring that down quite a bit. Much better. Because remember, distortion anywhere above the key group level is applied to all the voices at the same time. So when you've got more than one voice, if it's polyphonic, it's going to sound like a guitar playing through a distortion pedal. So you can end up really wanting to play power chords only if you're going to do that. Right. So now I can return to this later and I've got some nice settings, I can play with. And you could keep doing that, anything you wanted. You could do it to the rate of the LFO here. This was being applied to, if I remind myself, LFO 1 is going to the pan, so we could change the rate of the pan here. Frequency, create a new macro. There's my new macro. Let's call it pan rate, okay? created my sound. I want to save my sound. I save the program as. Here's a place where I store all my sounds. Pad, cinematic, auto pan. That'll do. Now it's called cinematic auto pan. Now it's called cinematic auto pan. There we go. And I think I'll conclude my first little mini tutorial there. Say, do put in the comments or write to me on the forum if anything else you'd like to see, any other areas you want me to go into in some future tutorials. Thanks for watching.